Introducing Bryan Adams Radio on iHeartRadio.
Got my first real six string.
Hosted by Bryan Adams himself.
Join me for an insider look on a wild ride through 40 years of global rock and roll.
Bryan Adams Radio. Now available on the free iHeartRadio app. Or ask your smart speaker to play Bryan Adams Radio on iHeartRadio.
Who's ready to rock?
Kids wanna rock.
Not sure what to get the young people on your list? The latest phone, sneakers, video games? Get the one thing they need now more than ever. Give their feelings a place to go. When you donate to Kids Help Phone, you're giving the young people in your life and across the country access to free 24/7 judgment-free support. Because at the end of the day, it's their thoughts that count. Donate at kidshelpphone.ca. And together, we can give their feelings a place to go.
This is Encore.
Cool.
The stories behind the songs.
Thank you.
Here's iHeartRadio's Miles Galloway.
Believe it or not, Red Hot Chili Peppers were formed all the way back in 1982 as Tony Flo and the Majestic Masters of Mayhem. No idea why that name didn't ever catch on. But with all due respect to original members, the late great guitarist Hilel Slovak and drummer Jack Irons, the current lineup we all know and love formed some 6 years later in the final months of 1988. Joining original members Tony Flo, a.k.a. Anthony Kiedis from here on out, and Flea, a.k.a., Flea, were guitar genius John Frusciante and world's most successful Will Ferrell Look Alike Chad Smith. Go on and picture the Red Hot Chili Peppers in your head. Chances are it's this core four you're thinking of, although there were at least another 8 transient members of RHCP throughout the years, with Frusciante especially coming and going throughout the band's history, but we'll get to that. Truly a unicorn in the music business, rivaled perhaps only by fellow rock gods and Encore episode subjects Foo Fighters and U2, Red Hot Chili Peppers can honestly map out serious cultural relevance in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s and 2020s, with their latest Billboard Hot 100 entry and Canadian rock #1 single conquering airwaves as recently as 2022. With so much turmoil with the band, it's crazy to think that the Chili Peppers have never actually broken up, despite well-documented addictions, tragedy and loss, lack of focus, changes in sound, and the aforementioned lineup changes over their 40-plus years in rock. So, for this episode of Encore, we're going to zoom in on perhaps their most successful pivot of all, becoming what felt like a brand new band all over again some 15 years into their career. This is the story of Red Hot Chili Peppers' 2000 hit, Californication. To people of a certain age, 1991's acclaimed album Blood Sugar Sex Magik is the definitive Chili Peppers record. And there's a strong argument for it. Classics like Give It Away, Suck My Kiss, Breaking the Girl, and of course, Under the Bridge are amongst the gems on that album, with the latter being the band's peak charting single on the Billboard Hot 100. While this episode of Encore is actually about a song that came out nearly a decade later, the story of Blood Sugar Sex Magik is critical to that of Californication, with twists and turns so dark you'll probably start to feel like you're living in a Chili Peppers multiverse. After falling out with their constant collaborator Michael Beinhorn in the late 80s, the Chili Peppers were in need of a rebrand and would find themselves teaming up with producer Rick Rubin for the very first time. Rubin had been making quite a name for himself as this sort of artist whisperer, and was at one time slated to produce the Chili's 1987 record, The Uplift Mofo Party Plan, but had turned down the opportunity to work with the guys due to their unfocused approach, as well as Kiedis and then guitarist Hilel Slovak's excessive drug use. Then, as you may already know, Slovak would sadly die of a heroin overdose soon after Party Plan's release. Slovak's death would shake the band to its very core, with drummer Jack Irons leaving the group shortly thereafter, unable to deal with the intense grief of losing a bandmate and a friend. Slovak's eventual replacement, John Frusciante, was just an 18-year-old Chili Peppers superfan when he joined, idolizing the band and Hilel Slovak's work to an obsessive degree. Frusciante had even had conversations with Slovak about the direction of the group, what the definition of artistic success was, and how important it was to stay true to the underground scene from which the band came from. As if by divine intervention, Frusciante was also a guitar prodigy who had studied the entirety of the Peppers catalogue. He paradoxically claimed to not really be much of a funk rock guy when he joined, but under Flea's tutelage, quickly became a master of the sound. With Chad Smith also now in tow, just in time for 1989's album Mother's Milk, the stars would start to align for the Chili Peppers commercially, as Mother's Milk wasn't a great album, but a focused and professional one, showing off a sort of zany cohesion that highlighted the skills of all the members. Particularly Frusciante, with the aforementioned producer Beinhorn noting, "It was apparent early on that John was the perfect guitarist for the band. He brought the elements of songwriting and composition to the band, which they'd never truly had prior to his involvement. I believe that John is a pivotal figure in the Chili Peppers, being that he's such a distinctive songwriter." So by the time Rick Rubin was turned back onto the band post Mother's Milk, it was clear that the Chili Peppers were willing to get to work. Ever the mystical weirdo, Rubin convinced the band to record the record in a mansion once inhabited by magician Harry Houdini. The guys were quickly convinced that the mansion was haunted, which allegedly creeped Chad Smith out enough to not actually stay in the house overnight like the rest of the group.
No, there's a big old mansion in the Hollywood Hills, and when we were writing these songs for this record, Rick Rubin was there with us, the bearded wonder, the mighty Rick Rubin. And I think he got a sense that the songs we were writing were very warm and gritty and funky and dirty, and they didn't belong to go into a studio. And it wasn't right for like the sterile, clinical, anal retentive, secretarial, greasy aluminum foil type of a vibe that a studio has. He said, "How'd you guys like to make this record in a house?" And we said, "Yeah." And so he found this big, beautiful house, and we built a studio in the house, and the house was haunted with these spirits. And we all had bedrooms in the house, and we hired a psycho chef to cook food for us, so we never had to leave the house. And we lived with the spirits. And, you know, we made our music, and we woke up, and we read the paper and had coffee and made music. And
But did it affect the music, the fact that this place was, you felt spirits there? Do you think it had an effect?
The music was written, but just being in that type of an environment affected our whole state of mind. You know, because we weren't pressured by the clock, and it was just that was the ultimate Funky Monks Boys Club right there, just like being in the house with the same four guys and getting along with each other for a month and a half.
Locked away in Houdini's mansion, the guys rapidly concocted a masterpiece. John and Anthony would bounce song ideas off each other back and forth, while Chad and Flea would fill the rhythm section in with relative ease. Rubin kept the notoriously unruly Peppers in check, helping them find the perfect melodies, lyrics and beats, brick by sexy brick. As the story goes, one day, a particularly vulnerable Anthony Kiedis showed Rubin lyrics to a poem he'd written about his struggles with heroin and cocaine addiction, finding himself at points alone and desperate, under a bridge. Rubin convinced Kiedis to show the band the poem despite his protestation that the lyrics were too soft for RHCP, and wouldn't you know it, Frusciante had the perfect chords to envelop around the depressing words, and an all-time classic, Under the Bridge, was born. You might assume that all of this is the beginning of a happy tale. After all, with blind hindsight, we can clearly map out that the Chili Peppers went from strength to strength. Blood Sugar Sex Magik and its aforementioned legendary singles were both critically and commercially acclaimed, with the band winning their very first Grammy Award and selling millions of records off the back of what was considered true artistic brilliance. Furthermore, the Chili's received retroactive critical acclaim for their earlier works. Sure, not amazing or essential records to everyone, but a deep enough back catalogue of funk jams that fit in well with the lore of their tumultuous and tragic band dynamics. Plus, Rick Rubin had found one of his true artistic muses, starting a long and fruitful relationship with Los Angeles' favourite deviants. You might assume that, but that's not what happened in this timeline. Like we've mentioned so many times before on Encore, artists are truly a different breed, and to call John Frusciante a little bit different is probably an understatement. The youngest of the Chili Peppers started off the Blood Sugar Sex Magik era, auspiciously enough, with the first few shows of tour garnering rave reviews from critics. It didn't hurt that Pearl Jam, Smashing Pumpkins, or Nirvana were also on the bill at various points, but by the time Under the Bridge was skyrocketing up the charts, something changed inside Frusciante. According to Anthony Kiedis' 2004 autobiography Scar Tissue, Frusciante became frustrated with the entire concept of being a successful mainstream rock band, feeling as if they were betraying the true spirit of what the group was supposed to be, and became spiteful, ashamed of their output, and depressed. John would say, "We're too popular. I don't need to be at this level of success. I would just be proud to be playing this music in clubs like you guys were doing 2 years ago." As the band got bigger and bigger, John Frusciante got more and more isolated and unsettled, sometimes sulking on stage. As Kiedis recalled, "We had a sold-out house one night and John just stood in the corner, barely playing his guitar. We came off stage and John and I got into it. Years later, John would offer up a glimpse of his headspace to Much.
I'm comfortable with it because I had time to think about everything,
Yeah. What did you think about?
In perspective, I mean, at the time that I quit the band, I was really inspired by these people who didn't do very well, career-wise, like Syd Barrett and, at the time, the Meat Puppets hadn't done well, but they have since then, but they were one of my favorite bands at the time. The Minutemen and all these people who I just didn't feel did very well in their careers, and I didn't want to do well myself, But since then, I'm more in touch with the fact that there's lots of popular people that they loved and that I loved, and that rock stardom does a good thing for a lot of people. It gives them healthy people to look up to, instead of whoever's the richest guy in town or whatever, Rock stars are like good people to look up to, So I think it serves a good purpose,
Do you
I have
think?
no problem with it. At the time, I did,
In February of 92, the Chili's were invited to play Saturday Night Live. When it was time to play Under the Bridge, Frusciante went rogue, with Kiedis recalling, John was experimenting the way he would have it if we'd been rehearsing the tune, but we weren't. We were on live TV in front of millions of people and it was torture. I started singing in what I thought was the key he was playing in. I felt like I was getting stabbed in the back and hung out to dry in front of all of America while this guy was off in the corner playing some dissonant out-of-tune experiment. I can't play you much of that unhinged performance, but brace yourself for a little treat. Sorry about that. By May of 92, the Chili Peppers were now on the road in Japan, ready to play Tokyo's Club Quattro, where John Frusciante did the unthinkable. He refused to go on stage, telling the guys he had quit, effective immediately. Some hardcore convincing eventually got him back out on stage for that one final show. But as Kiedis explains, it was the most horrible show ever. Every single note, every single word hurt, knowing that we were no longer a band. I kept looking over at John and seeing this dead statue of disdain. And that night, John disappeared from the topsy-turvy world of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. It's certainly worth noting that throughout this period of the band, and in the years that followed, Frusciante was battling his own demons, with depression and addiction grabbing hold of him like many of former and fellow bandmates. Frusciante told Italian magazine Il Mucchio Selvaggio in 2004 about the existential crisis he found himself in, hearing voices in his head telling him to leave the group or else he wouldn't make it, and that he needed to completely distance himself from the real world and the world of a traveling musician. He trusted those voices and knew he needed to make a change, even if the change would involve putting his life at risk. As Frusciante puts it, I left the band and decided to become a drug addict. I believe I made the right choice. It was what I needed then. He would also tell Spin magazine in 2002, I was very sad and I was always happy when I was on drugs. Therefore, I should be on drugs all the time. I was never guilty. I was always really proud to be an addict. In the years that followed, Frusciante became a recluse as he spiraled deeper and deeper into heroin, cocaine, and alcohol addiction. He released some truly unlistenable music that was actually so bizarre and avant-garde that the Chili Peppers and their label waived the rights to his album Neandra Lades and Usually Just a T-shirt over to Rick Rubin to release it if he wanted to because, well, they probably saw no value in it. Despite his spiritual protestations, Frusciante's addictions had completely taken over, and by 1996, he was nothing but skin and bones. As his addictions ravaged his body, John would suffer from frightening medical conditions that easily could have killed him. Frusciante was scarred and burned so severely on his arms from heroin and cocaine abuse, he eventually had to undergo skin grafts to repair the damage. He also nearly died from a serious blood infection, and he had to have his rotting teeth removed and fully replaced with dental implants to fight off a gruesome oral infection. He would live in squalor, lose his home, and release more incoherent and troubling music just for drug money. Despite all of this, somehow Frusciante survived. With a mixture of cold turkey abstinence and a brief stint in rehab urged on by his loved ones, he began to live and eat cleanly and started practicing yoga, telling Rock Sound magazine, I don't need to take drugs. I feel so much more high all the time right now. I don't even consider doing them. They're completely silly. Between my dedication to trying to constantly be a better musician and eating my health foods and doing yoga, I feel so much more high than I did the last few years of doing drugs. At this point, I'm the happiest person in the world.
Introducing Bryan Adams Radio on iHeartRadio.
Got my first real six-string.
Hosted by Bryan Adams himself.
Join me for an insider look on a wild ride through 40 years of global rock and roll.
Bryan Adams Radio.
I'm ready
Now available on the free iHeartRadio app. Or ask your smart speaker to play Bryan Adams Radio on iHeartRadio.
Who's ready to rock?
Everywhere I go, kids wanna rock.
As you might imagine, the Chili Peppers were decidedly not the happiest people in the world at this time. They initially struggled to find a replacement for Frusciante to finish up their touring commitments before eventually settling on famed guitarist Dave Navarro, formerly of Jane's Addiction. Even though they had no choice but to move on from John, at Lollapalooza, Flea even mentioned to Much how much they missed him.
I was just flipping the channels and our Suck My Kiss video was on. And it was nice to see. I mean, it was kind of painful to see because John was in it playing and everything. And that was such a great time. But it was wild to see.
It was a good time. It was a good time. There'll be other good times.
They will. Let the times get slimy.
Once he became a permanent member, Navarro never truly felt the right fit for RHCP. He struggled to mesh musically with the other three Chilis and wasn't much of a funk rock guy. One thing he did have in common with the band was a problematic drug habit, which, while wasn't exactly surprising, didn't make for a stable and healthy working environment. Eventually, after many delays, the Peppers would release their only record with Navarro, the much-maligned One Hot Minute. The band has gone on record over the years to credit the talent of Frusciante as a songwriter in hindsight, especially in comparison with Navarro, with Flea noting, John Frusciante had been a true anomaly when it came to songwriting. I just figured that was how all guitar players were, that you showed them your lyrics and sang a little bit, and the next thing you knew, you had a song. That didn't happen right off the bat with Dave. It was through this period that Anthony Kiedis, no stranger to addiction himself, suffered a semi-secret relapse in his struggle with hard drugs after a few years of sobriety, and the band struggled in turn to really rely on him as a songwriter or creative force. The album sold poorly, the touring dried up, and to make matters worse, Kiedis also suffered separate serious injuries to his hand and elbow, causing further cancellations and delays of touring commitments. With both Navarro and Kiedis dependent on substances and professionally at an impasse, Navarro was relieved of his duties in March of '98. In hindsight, it was doomed from the start. On his brief time with the Chilis, Navarro, for the most part, now seems at peace, telling NME in 2010, I was fired for my drug use at the time and for musical differences. Anthony says it was because I tripped and fell over an amp while on drugs. I say that he was more on drugs than me at that point. We both had a loose relationship with reality. Who do you want to believe? Although it seemed like a good idea to fire Navarro for the sake of the band, that doesn't mean that the rest of the Red Hot Chili Peppers were suddenly in a good place. Their recent downturn in fortune left them feeling like maybe it was time to call it quits altogether. Without John in their ranks, it just didn't feel like anything was going to go right for the band, who had been on top of the world at the decade's start. Luckily enough, Flea, who by all accounts seems to be the most magnanimous Chili Pepper, had been the one member of the band who had kept in touch with John. They'd remain friends and occasional collaborators strictly for the love of music, and according to Warner VP of A&R at the time, Dave Katz-Nelson, Frusciante's drug recovery might have even stemmed from a promise from Flea that if he kicked his habit, they would be in a band together again. Although that sounds a little bit like PR spin to me.
Why did you decide to come back, and why did you guys let him back? Yeah.
Why did we let him back?
That's a good question. Well, he paid us a lot of money.
Yeah, that's what I think.
No, it wasn't a let or a have. It was just a meant to be.
Oh, well,
It was
the best this way.
we
Definitely.
were just fulfilling a necessity of fate.
Yeah, well, I joined the band because I love playing music all the time, having that to think about all the time, and I could tell that they were going to be like receptive and sensitive to what I would try to do, by devoting my life to music,
Well, it sounds really.
Nevertheless, within a matter of weeks of Dave Navarro's departure, John Frusciante was a Red Hot Chili Pepper once more. With that, the guys called up Rick Rubin and got back to work. In the summer of 1998, the reunited Chili Peppers appropriately began to write and practice in Flea's makeshift garage home studio. Free of any expectations, let's face it, things could hardly get worse for the band at this point. The band felt rejuvenated, with Anthony Kiedis recalling, everyone was having fun. It was as if we had nothing to lose, nothing to gain. We didn't care. We were making music for the sake of making music. On his walkout that changed the trajectory of the band, Frusciante himself offered this explanation to Much.
Did you say that you were afraid that the success of the band would actually contaminate the band, or something to that effect?
It was already contaminating it, you know. Already before I quit, we weren't getting along well, you know. It being successful and each of us reacting a different way to it had made us to where we weren't friends anymore, you know. And if we would have stayed together at that point, we would have been doing it purely as a business kind of motive, you know, rather than a motive of friendship and wanting to play music together. If we would have done another album with the lineup of me and being in the band, it's what it would have been about, and I didn't want to be a part of anything like that, and I sensed that sort of thing was happening, you know. There's nothing wrong with a lot of people buying what you do. I never felt that there was a problem with that. I just felt bad about being a part of something where what we were being acclaimed for was something that I wasn't having fun doing, you know. Because the most important thing for me is to have my relationship with music and my relationship with certain spirits to be as good as it can be, and so that's, you know, that's what's important to me above all else. Like I'll take a good relationship with those spirits that I get along with over success any day, you know. But they also they can work together, you know. So that's what's happening right now. We've got like a merging of the spirits and of the people on Earth to create this kind of success that everybody likes, you know.
By the time the band joined Ruben at Cello Studios in Los Angeles, they were ready to record their reintroduction in about 3 weeks, almost as if they were completely different people, with Ruben noting that these Chili Peppers would show up to work on time, in stark contrast to the day-long pot sessions or sexual indulgences of previous eras.
Drugs, you know, I've done my share, and they stopped working for me years ago. And it's been kind of a brutal element of my life ever since, you know. And you know, knock on wood, thank God. And all my, well, I don't do them anymore. Yeah. You know, I'm clean now, and life is really quite spectacular in that state of mind. You know, it was interesting for a while, then it just completely turned on me. That's been my experience. People ask me all the time, well, isn't it hard to stay clean when you're on the road? And no. It really isn't. When you're into being clean, it's like that's just the energy you attract, and it's not a bunch of people all in your face trying to get you high. And it wouldn't matter if they were, because I'm not down.
Right. Even though the Peppers were now drug-free, the memories and pain of years gone by saturated the lyrical content of their record called Californication, an aptly named record described by Kiedis as an album about wandering souls who've lost their way searching for the American dream in California. Or as John and Flea would explain to Much.
I don't know what the Californication. It means a lot of different things. It doesn't just mean this thin sort of shit that just dribbled out of Los Angeles. You know, it means all kinds of things.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's a word that could mean a lot of things. But it's like just because in LA, in Hollywood, the media is such a major thing that it focuses on art, and it focuses on like a lot of really bad imitations of art that it's designed just to make money. Just because it's all focused on there, I mean, I think that sort of attitude and that sort of soullessness is everywhere, you know. I mean, there's more of it in all big cities.
Lead single Scar Tissue and follow-up Other Side showcased a side of the band more akin to their sound in Under the Bridge than their more funk-inspired party joints, and the returning John Frusciante was at the center of the songwriting, stripping down the sound to a mellow, almost soothing groove, accentuated by Kiedis' dark and desperate lyrics. This introspective tilt was incredibly beneficial for the reunited Chili's, with their slower chronicles outperforming the more frat-friendly songs like Around the World and Parallel Universe in every metric. But it was the title track itself, Californication, that became the band's calling card. Not since Under the Bridge had the Chili Peppers released such a moving piece of music. As Kiedis told Much,
we had to actually go through everything we did in the last 8 years for this record to have meaning and to exist. I mean, this had a lot to do with John disappearing, with me disappearing, with us really kind of going through the backlash of Blood Sugar in order for this to have been written. So, I mean, you know, it's definitely akin to Blood Sugar. There's a relationship there, but it didn't make sense at that time of Blood Sugar. This is not the record we would have made if we kept writing songs after Blood Sugar with John. This would not have been the next record we made.
A dark, sarcastic, and seemingly nonsensical song at times, Californication is built off the idea that the world is doomed for as long as we're addicted to the ideologies of what Hollywood is selling us. Fake altruism, consumerism, and the constant chasing of a dream that may kill us in the end. It's easy to see how beneath all the funk rock riffs of the Chili Peppers' past, it's the sentiments expressed in this single that truly represented their worldview. Whatever it was, the people agreed, and Californication, the song, went 5 times platinum within a year of its release, already a triple platinum album in its own right, thanks to the aforementioned singles. The record went on to sell another cool 1 million copies based off the title track's release within a matter of months. As of 2024, the album sits at an astounding 8 times platinum in the US, and the single is at 6 times, with both crossing over their latest 1 million in June of this year. While some critics criticize the growing-up sound of the former bad boys of funk and roll, most appreciated its balance, with Frusciante receiving many of the plaudits. AllMusic's Greg Prado crowned John as the quintessential RHCP guitarist, calling the entire record a classic, while Entertainment Weekly commended Frusciante for making RHCP more relaxed, less grating, and in their own way, more introspective. The music video for Californication was also quite groundbreaking, a sort of proto-Grand Theft Auto-style video game with the polygonal Chili Peppers speedrunning through various 3D worlds from skateboarding to swimming to racing cars along Hollywood Boulevard. The bizarre video, directed by Jonathan Dayton and Valerie Faris, is intercut with the real-life Chili Peppers, topless, naturally, floating in front of a cloudscape, a visual that is equal parts indulgent and depressing, as some of the lyrics of the song are brought to life in the open-world fantasy land. If you've never seen it, what are you waiting for? It's currently RHCP's most viewed video, sitting at over 1.1 billion views on YouTube, and it's incredibly creative. And in March of 2022, an enterprising independent video game developer from Spain named Miquel Camps Orteza recreated the Californication video as a working video game. Orteza wrote, "I wanted to play that game so bad. It's 2022 and I haven't seen anyone made the game, so I challenged myself to recreate it. I've selected some epic moments from the video and turned them into 7 levels, each one with different game mechanics. I hope you like this game." Now 25 years old, Californication has also become a bit of a conspiracy meme online, with a number of creators on TikTok, YouTube, and the like believing that Kiedis and company actually predicted the future with the lyrical content of Californication. Some of the so-called predictions zoom in on psychic spies from China, try to steal your mind's elation, while people have claimed predicts the state of China's hacking methods, allegedly through apps like TikTok. There's also, of course, pay your surgeon very well to break the spell of aging, which is supposedly predicting the rise in plastic surgery. Honestly, almost every line of the song has now been analysed by digital super sleuths online. But I'll leave it at those two for now before you start calling me Miles Rogan. Jamie, pull that last line up for me, will you? Post-Californication, the Chili Peppers would release 2 wildly successful records, O2's By the Way and the ambitious double record Stadium Arcadium with John Frusciante in 2006, before, you guessed it, John quit the band in 2009. Frusciante's then friend and collaborator, guitarist Josh Klinghoffer, would fill his spot in the band for him for almost exactly 10 years before being replaced by John Frusciante in the final days of 2019. While the Klinghoffer records remain true to the spirit of the Peppers sound, it was 2022's Unlimited Love that mobilized the true fans once more, giving them their first #1 album on the Billboard 200 since the last time Frusciante was in the group. The Chili's would follow up that record with a second record in 2022, Return of the Dream Canteen, which would also go to #1 on the top album charts, a feat that no band has done since System of a Down scored 2 #1 records in 2005. As far as we can tell, RHCP is showing no signs of slowing down, despite Kiedis, Flea and Smith now in their early 60s, with Frusciante still at a sprightly 54. Only a fool would try to predict what the Peppers will do next. Does anyone know any good TikTok conspiracy theorists? Maybe they can help. I'm Miles Galloway, and that was the story of Red Hot Chili Peppers' Californication on Encore, with new episodes every Thursday.
Encore is an iHeartRadio Canada podcast. Subscribe to this podcast on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts. Download the iHeartRadio app for more great podcasts just like these.
Introducing Bryan Adams Radio on iHeartRadio.
Got my first real six-string.
Hosted by Bryan Adams himself.
Join me for an insider look on a wild ride through 40 years of global rock and roll.
Bryan Adams Radio. Now available on the free iHeartRadio app. Or ask your smart speaker to play Bryan Adams Radio on iHeartRadio.
Who's ready to rock?
Everywhere I go, kids wanna rock.